Alright, what's going on everyone? In this video we're going to cover state management using the Composition API. Now normally if you wanted to incorporate state management into your Vue application, you would use the Vuex library to do so. But now with the implementation of the Composition API included within Vue 3, we now have an alternative way to incorporate state into our Vue application, which is what I'm going to show you here today. Now within this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to do to set up this alternative version of state management inside of your Vue application. Now to demonstrate this here, what I have are two different things. So we have this Vue state counter, which right here, this value of 0 is a piece of state. And then when we click on the plus or minus here, we're going to go ahead and increment that value of state by 1, or we're going to go ahead and decrease it by 1. And then also what I have here is we're going to touch upon two-way binding using this alternative version of state management, where if I go ahead and type in a value here, it's going to go ahead and update the state. And what we're also going to do is bind this color right here to the actual text of the color itself. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Now in order to save some time, and if you also want to follow along with me during this video, what I've done is I've created a repository for the starting files at which we're going to start this tutorial at, which is going to include some styling and some simple project structure. So what I'm going to do here is on the starting files branch, there is also a master branch that has the completed version of this tutorial as well. So on the starting files, what I'll do is come over to this code button right here, and we're going to download the zip. And then we're going to go ahead and open this in my Finder. So I'll do Reveal in Finder. And then I'll open this zip, and then we're going to open it up with VS Code here. So I'll drag it, and then we'll open this up right here. And then we'll just expand this to be full screen. Now, first thing you need to do is install all the dependencies, so that way we can go ahead and actually run this application on our local server. So let's open up our terminal here, and then we'll say npm and that's going to go ahead and install all the dependencies we need for this tutorial. Okay, with that complete, we can now spin up our local development server for our Vue application. So to do this inside of our terminal, we want to run the command npm run serve, and we should get an indication that our development server has been started. And then after a few seconds here, you can see that our app is going to be running on our local host. So let's go ahead and open this up inside of our browser. And as you can see, this is going to be the starting files that we have to begin this tutorial. Now back here in VS Code, let's begin by navigating into our SRC folder here, and then let's navigate into our views folder, and we're going to open up the file called home.vue. Now this file is going to contain all of the markup, functionality, and styling for our initial Vue state counter, which if we go over to our browser is this right here. Now this counter works, so if I click on the plus here, you can see that it's going to increase the counter value by 1, and then if I click on the minus here, it's going to decrease it by 1. Okay, so let me run you through exactly how this works. So the markup's pretty simple. Let's scroll down here to the setup, which has the functionality for this. So currently what we're doing to start off is we're creating a local variable here called count, and we're setting it equal to a ref with a value of 0. Now really quick, if you don't know why we're wrapping this in a ref, it's because we need to make this reactive, so that way when we update the value here of the count variable inside of these functions, we see that reflected inside of the actual counter here. So we can actually see it go to 3, 4, 5, and etc. If we didn't make this reactive, then we wouldn't see that change reflected here inside of our counter. Okay, and then we have our two functions here of increase and decrease, which we're just taking the count.value, and we're going to go ahead and do a plus plus to go ahead and increment it by 1. And then for the decrease, we're doing the same thing, except we're doing a minus minus to decrease it by 1. Now, in order to use these functions and our variable here, we need to return those, and then we're using those inside of our template here. Now, the objective of this tutorial and video is to go ahead and convert from using a local version of our count, and we want to go ahead and create a store and create this to be a new value of state. And then we also want to create some what they call mutations to go ahead and update that state. So the first thing we want to do is set up our store. So for this video, what I've done is I have included inside of the starting files repository the folder structure that we're going to be using for our state management via the composition API. So as you can see inside of this SRC folder here, we have a folder called store, and inside of here we have a file called index.js. Now, I also do want to mention you don't have to use this naming convention that I've used here inside of this video. Now, if you're familiar with Vuex, this structure will be very similar because it's the same thing that they use when you incorporate Vuex into your Vue application. So I just went ahead and kept it simple and used the same structure that they did, but feel free to use any sort of naming convention that you please. So first off, what we want to do here is open up our index.js, and we're going to begin by importing our reactive here from Vue, because we want to make our state reactive and we want to wrap our state inside of this reactive method here from Vue. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const, and we'll say state is equal to reactive here, and then we want to go ahead and incorporate our values of state here. So for the time being, we're going to have 1, and it's going to be called count, and we'll give it a value of 10. Okay, now the last thing we need to do here is we actually want to export our state here, so that way we can use it inside of our Vue application here. So we'll say export default, and we'll say state. So there we go. We've now set up our store and we've incorporated a new value of state. So the next thing we want to do is head back over to our home file and actually use this value of state as opposed to the local value of count that we have currently inside of that file. Now, when using this alternative version of state management, whenever we want to access state inside a particular file, we need to import our store into that file. So to begin here inside of our home file, let's import our store. So we'll say from, and then we'll go to the store folder here, and then our index.js file. Now, there are two different ways we can access our state here. So what we can do is, I'll show you the first way, is since we're importing store right here, what we can do is inside of our return statement here, we can just return the store. Now, instead of outputting our local value of count here that we have inside of our setup option, what we can do is reference our store. Then we have our state, then inside of our state we have our value of count. So we can go ahead and say store.state.count here. So now if we head back over to our browser here, you can see that we have this value of 10, which is the current version of count if we go back to our store here inside of our state. Now, there's another way we can do this, so let's go ahead and revert this back to count here. So what we can do is we can actually keep our variable here of count, but what we can do is we can set it equal to the value inside of our store. So to do this, what we want is we need to import the computed here from Vue, because we're going to be using that. So what we'll say here is computed, and then we want to return store.state.count here. And this will work the same as if we were directly outputting it here via store.state.count. Now, I prefer to use this method right here as it makes your HTML a little bit cleaner, but the preference is up to you. You have either choice when using your state via this method inside of your file. Okay, so to avoid the error, since we're no longer using ref, let's go ahead and go to that. And then if I save it here, you can still see that the value being outputted from our store and our state is still 10. Now that our count variable is being set to this computed, which is returning our store.state.count, we can no longer just run these functions of increase and decrease where we're referencing the count.value and we're incrementing it by 1 or we're decreasing it by 1. And I can show you what happens if we leave it like this and we run these functions. So let's go over to our browser here, and if I click on the plus here, you can see what's going to happen is we're going to get this error here that says computed value is read only, and you can see here that when I hit the minus, we get that same exact error. So what we need to do is, if you're familiar with Vuex, to update state, what you do is you run a mutation. So let's go ahead and create some mutations to update our count state right here whenever we go ahead and click the plus or minus button here. Okay, so back inside of our project here, let's go over to our index.js, and we want to create some mutations. Now, We can name this anything we want, but to keep things consistent with how Vuex works, I'm going to go ahead and name these mutations. So we're going to say const mutations here, and we'll set this equal to an object. And the first function that we want to create is going to be increase. Okay. Now inside of here, what we want to do is we want to reference our state, and we want to say count, and we're going to do plus plus. Okay. And then I'm pretty sure you can assume for the decrease here, what we're going to do is we'll say decrease, and then we're going to say state.count, and we'll do minus minus here. Okay. And then we need some commas here, and that should go ahead and resolve that error. Now to use these mutations inside of our files, we once again need to export them here inside of our export default. So we'll say mutations here. So now if we go back to our home file here, what we can do is once again, we have two options of how we can go ahead and call these mutations here. So we can actually call them directly on the click handler here. So we can say store.mutations.increase here, and then I can go ahead and just copy and paste this here, and we'll say let's just go ahead and remove this, and we'll say decrease here. Okay, so now if we head back over to our browser here, we should now see that we're going to go ahead and see our count go ahead and increase and decrease, and we press the plus and minus button here. Okay, now once again, we also have another option to go ahead and call these mutations. So let's go ahead and revert these here. So once again, we can do something very similar to how we're accessing it here inside of our setup options. So what we can do is instead of calling the count.value plus plus, we can say store, let's see, store.mutations, and we can call increase here. Okay. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing here for the decrease. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this in here, and then we'll call this decrease. Okay, so this should work the same. It's just a different way of doing it. So once again, the option is up to you. If you want to call it directly on the actual click event you're calling, you can do that, or you can go ahead and reference it here inside of a function inside of your setup option. So if we go back over to our browser here, we should still be able to go ahead and mutate our state by 1 if I click on the plus, and decrease it by 1 if I click on the minus here. Now we learned how we can create state, and we also learned how we can update our state through mutations. But what happens if you want to alter the current value of state based on a certain condition? So say for our example, we want to take our count value here and we want to multiply that by 3. We want to triple it. Now, what we would do within Vuex is what they call a getter. So to keep things consistent, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. So basically, if you're unfamiliar with what a getter is, it's just a computed value of the piece of state that you want to go ahead and alter. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our const, and we'll say getters here and set this equal to an object. And then let's call this triple count. And then we'll go ahead and open this up, and all we want to go ahead and do is return state dot count here, and we want to multiply this by 3. Okay, and that's all we have to do. Now to use our getters inside of our project here, once again we need to return this, so let's go ahead and do this. And then let's go over to our home.view, and let's import this newly created getter here. So what we'll do is let's go right below our count here and create a new paragraph tag, and what we'll say here is let's go ahead and say count tripled here, and then let's output this newly created getter. So how we can access this is by saying store, let's see if I can spell that right, store dot getters, and we'll say dot triple count here. Now if I go ahead and, well, that's not even spelled right here, so let's go ahead and spell that right. Let's see here. So now if we save this and we go over to our project here, you can see count triple, and then we get this function triple count return state.count times 3. So something is going on. Now, if you're familiar with Vuex, you would know that you don't have to go ahead and declare this as a function. Vuex takes care of that for you. But when we're using this method of state management, we have to declare this as a function. So now if we save this here, you can see that we get out the computed value of our current count times 3. So if I go ahead and change this to 11, we're going to get 33 and 36 and so forth. So now we are successfully able to go ahead and compute our current value of state of count. Now, I'd also like to mention that we can do the same exact thing with our getter here as we did with our state and store it inside of a variable inside of the setup option here. So let's go ahead and do that to show you how that works. So we'll call this data variable triple count here, and we'll go ahead and just leave it like that. And then inside of our setup option here, let's go ahead and create that. So we'll call this const, and we'll say triple count, and set this equal to a computed here, and then we'll return our store.getters.triple count, and then we'll go ahead and declare it as a function. And then to use this, we need to return it down here in this return statement. So let's go ahead and say triple count. And then if we save that and we head back over to our application here and we refresh it, you should see that it's still going to be computed as it was previously. So if we go ahead and do this, you can see that it's still multiplying it by 3. Now, the final thing that we're going to be covering here within this video is two-way binding. Now, to demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and paste in some markup here. So what we have is an input tag, a paragraph tag, and then an H1. So if you're unfamiliar with what two-way binding is, I'll go ahead and explain it here really quickly. Now, it's when you attach a V model that's associated to a piece of data within your application, and then when a user types in this input field, it goes ahead and updates that value of data to whatever the user has typed inside of this input field. Okay, now to get started with two-way binding for what we're going to be doing here with our state management, we need to head over to our store and create a new piece of state. So let's go ahead and do that. So right below our count state here, let's go ahead and create a new value of state, and we'll call this color, and we'll set this to blue initially. All right, so back inside of our home file here, we have two ways we can go ahead and achieve two-way binding using this alternative version of state management. Now, we have one instance where we can go ahead and do the two-way binding outside of the store, and then we have another way we can do the actual two-way binding from within the store, where we're actually updating the value of state within inside of our store. Okay, so I'll show you the first version, which is not my preferred method, but if you're familiar with Vuex, you wouldn't normally be able to do this, but like I said, since we're using the alternative version, we do have this option to do the binding outside of our store. So what we'll do is we'll set up a V model here, and we're going to go ahead and directly set this V model to reach out to our store and our state and the value of color. So we'll say store.state.color here. And then inside of our paragraph tag, what we'll do is we'll just output that value of state here. So we'll say store.state.color. Now, if I go ahead and save this and we head over to our application and we do a refresh here, you can see that the value of blue, that is the initial color of our state, is being shown here in the input, and we're also outputting it here inside of this paragraph tag here. And as I update the input, it's going to update our value of state. Now, for the other way that we can handle two-way binding, where we make the updating happen from within the store through mutation, let's first start off by creating a new variable here. So we'll call this color, and we're going to set this equal to a computed value, and then we'll have our brackets in here, and we're going to go ahead and have a get and then a set here. Now, what the get is going to do is it's going to go ahead and return the value of state from our store. So what we want to do here is return, we're going to say store.state.color. Okay, now what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and return this value here inside of our return statement, and then we want to attach it to our V model here within our input. So we're going to say color, and then the same thing here for our paragraph tag. Now, since we have this color value set up to the V model, what's going to happen within this set here, it's going to go ahead and pass the value as a parameter. So what we want to go ahead and do is we'll just call this value. And then what we need to do is we don't have this mutation set up just yet in our store, but we want to go ahead and create a mutation that's going to go ahead and update our state of color based on the value that the user is typing in from that input. So we're going to go ahead and say store.mutations, and we're going to go ahead and create a mutation we haven't done yet called set, let's see if I can type, color, and then we want to go ahead and pass that value as a parameter here. Okay, so let's head over to our store and create this mutation. So we call this set color, and we're going to accept a value here as a parameter, and all we're going to do is we're going to say state.color is going to equal that value. All right, and that's all we have to do. So now if we go over to our application and we do a refresh, we should still see that once we type in this input, we're going to see this be updated as well. And if I type in here, we do. Now that we have our store set up and everything is functioning properly, I want to show you how easy it is to access our store and our state content in other files of our application. So what I've done here is I have a file called counterstats.view. So we're going to go into here, and what I want to do is I want to output the current count and also the current color from our store. So like I mentioned, if we want to use the store in other files of our application, we need to import the store into that file. So first off, let's go ahead and import our store, and we'll go ahead and look into the store file here, and we'll grab that index.js file. And then within our setup option here, let's go ahead and create some data. So we'll go ahead and call this const, and we'll do count. And we also need to import computed because we're going to be setting these up to a computed value here. So we'll say import, and then we'll do computed, and then we'll say from, and then we'll do view here. Now inside of here, or back in our setup option, let's go ahead and set our count to a computed, and then we'll return the store.state.count here. And then we'll do the same, whoops, what did I do there? Let's go ahead and undo that. Okay, don't know what I did there. So we'll say store.state.count, and we'll save that. And let's try to duplicate this again. There we go. So we'll call this one color, and then we'll set this equal to store.state.color. Now to use these, we need to return them. So let's do a return statement here, and we'll say count and also color. And then we'll use these inside of our template here. So we'll go ahead and do count, and then let's go ahead and do the color here. All right, so now if we save this and we go back to our application here and we refresh, and let's go ahead and put the count to 13, and let's change the color of the day, and we'll change this to red. So now if we go over to this counter stats page here in the navigation, we should see that the current count is 14 and the current color is red. Alright everyone, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about this alternative version to state management using the composition API as opposed to using Vuex. Now, in my opinion, I don't think this is a replacement for Vuex, but I do think it's perfect for smaller projects that don't require a very big store. But anyways, that's going to go and do it. Have a good one, and I'll see you guys in the next one.